Seen through a military historian's eyes, this story is more than suspense. It is a meditation on erased service and unofficial wars. The rifle, the records, the coded designations, and the vanished operator all point to a system built to use patriots and then scrub them from memory. What makes it powerful is not only the mystery, but the moral weight. Who gets remembered, who gets buried, and who finally dares to testify for the dead.
Hollis pinched the rifle between two fingers, as if it were something disgusting. Pieces of rust rained down on his countertop. A deep crack split the wooden stock completely in two. The metal was so decayed you could not tell what it was. "Ma'am, this is not a firearm. It is a pile of junk," he declared. "Pull the trigger on this, and it will explode in your face." A few other customers laughed. The old woman remained perfectly still. "You might want to check the serial number before you decide," she said in a quiet voice. Hollis gave a little smile. He started working with guns at 16. He knew garbage when he saw it. Still, he decided to play along. He took a wire brush and began cleaning the receiver. As the rust gave way, numbers emerged. His movements became slower. The prefix was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a mix of letters and digits, ending in a dash and an X. He took out his phone to look it up. The database locked him out. The woman observed him with incredibly steady eyes. "That number has a tale to tell," she whispered, "because that rifle was never officially made. Just like me." Hollis finally looked up at her, his smirk gone. Just who was this woman? I am curious. Where is everyone listening from? Go ahead and drop your city in the comments below. If you love hearing about the unsung heroes that history leaves behind, make sure you subscribe. You will not regret it. Because just a few hours after Hollis saw that number, 2 federal agents walked into his store. After they heard the old woman's tale, one of the agents stood at attention and gave her a salute. What secret could that old rifle hold? The sun rose over the East Tennessee hills at 6:12 in the morning. A pink and orange glow cut through the morning fog that settled on the valley floor. The lights inside Mercer and Sons Firearms had buzzed to life at 5:47. That was exactly 13 minutes before he was supposed to flip the sign on the door to open. Hollis moved through his store with an easy confidence. At 26, he was lean thanks to a quick metabolism rather than any workout, and carried himself like someone who was always right. The shop had its familiar morning aroma. It was a blend of solvent, fragrant gun oil, aged wood, metal polish, and the slight chemical tang of bluing liquid. He filled a mug with coffee he had already brewed. He took it black, with no sugar, and stood by the main counter, scrolling through the security footage from the night before on his tablet. The footage showed nothing unusual. It never did. His shop sat on a rural highway about 20 minutes outside of Knoxville, surrounded by farmland and forests. Break-ins were not a big concern, but checking the cameras was a non-negotiable part of his morning ritual. For 643 days straight, he had performed the same sequence of tasks. First coffee, then security footage, followed by cleaning the display cases. The cases held a collection of handguns, organized by era and manufacturer. You could see Colt 1911s, Browning high powers, and a nickel-plated Smith & Wesson Model 29 that had been there since before Hollis was born. He wiped the glass using only straight, even strokes, avoiding circles completely. He worked from left to right, and from the highest point to the lowest. His dad always said that circles left smudges. Hollis did not know if that was a fact, but he did it anyway. He had on an old-fashioned gunsmith's apron made of brown leather, which was soft and worn around the seams. It had been his grandfather's, a man Hollis had never known. He passed away in 1994, just 3 years before Hollis came along. That apron felt like his real birthright, a sign that this was where he was meant to be. At 6:30, Hollis went to the rear of the store, toward a locked filing cabinet. The cabinet was painted olive drab, clearly military surplus, and covered in a fine layer of dust that never changed. A typed label on the drawer read, Estate Archive, pre-1980. He had questioned his dad about it years ago. His father claimed it was just filled with old sales receipts from his grandfather's time. Nothing of any value. It was perpetually locked. Hollis ran a hand across its dusty surface and then cleaned his fingers on his pants. Above the back workbench, an old rotary phone was mounted on the wall. The cream-colored plastic was now a pale yellow. Its coiled cord hung down like a sleeping serpent. In all his time working there, Hollis had never heard it make a sound. He doubted it was even connected. It looked like junk that should be tossed, but his dad had insisted he not touch it. So there it remained. Tucked behind the register was a small photo, held in place by the credit card terminal. It was a little 4x6-inch print. The picture was blurry, its colors faded to a dirty brown. The photo captured a group of soldiers standing next to some wooden boxes in a dense jungle setting. There were 7 men in total. You could not make out their features. They were blurred by the bright sunlight, or maybe just the passage of time. Hollis had stared at it more times than he could count, but the image never gave up its secrets. He had no idea who any of them were. It was just one more thing his father had ordered him to leave alone. At 7 o'clock sharp, his first customer walked in. It was Dale Pritchard, a regular, bringing in his Remington 700 for its scheduled 6-week scope adjustment. Dale was in his 60s, retired from a mysterious career, and enjoyed filling the silence with conversation. Hollis secured the rifle in a vise, checked the barrel, and started adjusting the scope. Dale rested against the counter, drinking the coffee Hollis gave him, a routine that was more about custom than camaraderie. Word is, some people have been asking about old army equipment around town, Dale said. They seemed like federal agents. They wore suits, but had on the wrong kind of shoes for our roads. That is unusual for this area. Hollis stayed focused on the scope. We get collectors making inquiries now and then, he offered. Not these guys, Dale insisted. They had that distinct government feel. You know the kind. Too well-dressed, too courteous. They wanted to know about firearms from the 70s and 80s, and they were very particular about original paperwork. For a brief moment, Hollis's hands stopped moving, the wrench poised above the scope. Then he continued, making 2 small, counterclockwise turns. It is likely just the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms doing inspections. They do that from time to time. Dale shrugged his shoulders. Could be. Something just seemed strange about it. They moved on to other topics. At 7:42, Dale paid for his service with cash and departed. Hollis went back to his workbench and just stared into space for a full minute. He walked over to the filing cabinet, looked at it for a few seconds, then went back to the front of the shop. At 9:15, a young couple came in. They were searching for a concealed handgun for the woman. Hollis presented 3 choices: a Glock 43, a Smith & Wesson Shield, and a SIG P3-65. He walked them through the variations in ammunition capacity, kickback, and concealability. The woman picked the Glock, a popular and practical option. Hollis ran the necessary background check and sold them the gun, along with a box of 9mm rounds and a suggestion for a local firing range. At 10:30, Webb Calhoun walked through the door. Webb, at 71, was a passionate collector of Civil War guns who had deep pockets. He spent his retirement traveling to gun shows and auctions, always hunting for a unique find. He visited Hollis's shop a couple of times a week to boast about his latest acquisitions or what he hoped to buy next. Hollis put up with him because Webb was a good customer. Then, at 11:18, the little bell over the entrance chimed. Hollis glanced up from a Colt Python he was cleaning to see an older woman enter. Her movements were slow yet deliberate, like she was rationing her strength. She wore an old canvas coat, faded blue jeans, and work boots caked with red clay. Her gray hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. Her face was weathered with wrinkles, but it held a certain toughness. She had prominent cheekbones. Her gaze swept across the store with a practiced, systematic quality. In her arms, she held something wrapped in an old wool blanket, the same olive green as army equipment. Hollis barely paid her any mind. Webb was going on about a Springfield trapdoor rifle he saw at a sale in Chattanooga. The woman approached the counter and waited quietly, holding her package. Hollis continued to wipe down the python. "Is there something I can do for you?" he finally asked. She did not reply right away. Instead, she placed the bundle on the counter with both hands. The movement was exact and made almost no sound. She set it down as if it were incredibly precious or extremely hazardous. She began to unroll the blanket with measured patience. The rifle slowly came into view. Rust coated every inch of its surface. The metal was so tarnished it was nearly black. You could see deep pitting and corrosion on the barrel. The woodstock was split from one end to the other. A fracture ran all the way from the stock's heel to its tip. The wood itself was warped and bloated from moisture. The rifle looked like something dragged out of a flooded cellar. Hollis set a Python revolver aside. He glanced from the gun to the woman, a patient smile on his face. It was not a mean look, just one for somebody who made a simple mistake. "Ma'am, I appreciate you bringing this in, but it is just a piece of junk. Honestly, it is not even safe to hang on a wall. The stock is cracked, and the metal is badly rusted. If you tried to fire this, it would probably blow up in your hands." In the next aisle, Webb chuckled to himself. That sounds like an accident waiting to happen. Hollis picked up the rifle with 2 fingers, holding it away from himself as if it were contaminated. The steel felt gritty in his grip. A small shower of rust sprinkled the glass countertop. "I can dispose of it for you," Hollis offered, "but it has absolutely no cash value. None at all." The woman did not speak. She simply watched him with a gaze that was disturbingly calm. Hollis put the rifle down with a loud clack. The sound hung in the air of the quiet shop. The 2 other customers had stopped looking around to watch them. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, which did not match her weathered appearance. "You might want to look at the serial number before you get rid of that." Hollis let out a genuine laugh. "Ma'am, please, trust me. I have been in this business since I was 16. I can spot scrap metal from across the room." She did not even flinch. Her face was blank, her eyes fixed on him. "The serial number?" she said again, her voice firm. "Just check it." The shop became completely silent. Webb stopped his conversation. The 2 customers over by the shotguns were now totally focused on the scene. With a long, tired sigh, Hollis grabbed a brass brush and a bottle of cleaning fluid. He wet a cloth. "Fine," he said. "Let us see what we have." He began to rub the spot on the gun where the marking should be. The brush made a scraping sound on the corroded steel. Dark, rust-colored bits fell onto the counter. Bit by bit, the solvent ate through the layers of grime. Numbers started to appear through the filth. Hollis scrubbed with more force. The rest of the number became clear. His hands slowed down. The serial code was strange. It did not have the right beginning. It was a combination of letters and digits, not just digits. The format was incorrect for any gun sold to the public. It ended with a hyphen and a letter, a hyphen and an X. Hollis froze completely. He stared at the code. GX1847-X. He had never seen a serial number arranged that way. Webb leaned in closer. "What is that?" Hollis did not respond. He took his phone out of his pocket and opened his appraisal application. He typed in the number. After 3 seconds, the screen showed, "No match found." He checked a different database for military weapons. The result was only 2 words. "Access restricted." What on earth? Hollis put his phone down. He walked into the back room without a word. The office was tiny, more like a big closet with a desk, and its walls were lined with shelves full of books. He took down a thick book from the second shelf. Its title was United States Military Small Arms Serial Numbers, 1945 to 1985. The red cover was worn and smooth along the edges from years of use. He flipped to the section dealing with serial codes. He quickly read the page. Near the bottom of page 347, a small note grabbed his attention. Codes that finished with a -X, -Y, or -Z were used for experimental or secret government projects. The records for them were sealed under National Security Directive 47B. Any inquiry needed a Freedom of Information Act request to the Department of Defense. Hollis read it a second time, then went back to the front of the store. The woman stood exactly where he had left her. Her hands were on the counter as she watched him with an unsettling composure. Hollis picked up the rifle again, but this time with extreme care. He saw it in a new light, his expert opinion replacing his earlier dismissal. "Where did you get this?" His voice had changed entirely. "It was a gift," Webb snickered. "A gift? Ma'am, women were not even in combat units back then." The woman turned her head slowly to look at Webb. She remained silent. The silence in the shop felt heavier than any spoken word. Hollis ignored everyone else. His complete focus was on the rifle, seeing it for what it was. He used a magnifying glass to inspect the threading on the barrel. This was not a factory product. It was a custom piece, made with great skill. He looked at the trigger group. It was built with high-end parts, fine-tuned for precision. His fingers traced the bolt, feeling for any strange wear marks. The signs hinted that it had been used with a suppressor. Next, he examined the stock. Under the damaged varnish and water stains, he noticed faint markings. Someone had carved letters into the wood and then tried to scrape them away. They were almost invisible, but they were still there. Hollis took a set of calipers from a drawer. He measured the chamber and the rifling inside the barrel. "This was made for long-distance shooting," Hollis whispered. "A competition-quality barrel for a very specific bullet. This is not a standard military rifle. It belonged to a specialist." His voice faded. The woman finished his sentence for him. "A sniper rifle from Operation Brushfire, 1973 to 1977, in Laos and Cambodia." The entire gun shop seemed to hold its breath. The other two customers stood like statues. Webb's mouth was wide open. Hollis could do nothing but stare at the woman. "Officially," the woman said, her voice flat and without any emotion, "we were never there." Hollis felt his own heart pounding. Brushfire was a secret operation. Counterinsurgency work. That whole mission is still top secret. "Most of it," she said, "and most of us as well. We are listed as having died, or our records were completely deleted." As she spoke, Hollis started seeing details he had missed. He noticed her posture, perfectly balanced. Her shoulders were set straight. A car outside made a loud noise, and her head snapped toward the sound immediately. She evaluated it, decided it was no threat, and then relaxed. The words she used sounded odd coming from her. Phrases like suppressed fire mission, windage calculation, and cold bore 0. It was the specific language of a professional, not an old woman in a local gun shop. Webb was finally able to speak. "Who are you? You can call me Ennis." Her phrasing was unusual. "Not my name is, but you can call me." "Ennis what?" Hollis asked her. "Just Ennis." Hollis slid the gun back to her side of the counter. "Listen, I am not sure what is going on here, but I cannot get involved if this is from some secret government deal. I cannot even give you a price on it." "I am not looking for your services," Ennis said. "I want to know its value." A nervous laugh escaped from Hollis. "Value? If this is real, it is one of maybe a dozen from a canceled program. It could be worth 6 figures, maybe even more. A museum would want it." "Then you will sell it for me." Webb took a step closer. Why now? Why bring it out after so long? For the first time, Ennis looked straight at him. Her eyes were a pale, almost colorless gray. Because for all this time, no one was searching for it. Now, someone is. As she spoke, her right hand subconsciously moved toward her left arm. She briefly touched the spot through her jacket. The motion was over in a second. Hollis's phone buzzed on the counter. He looked down at the screen. The message came from a number he did not know. It said, Who searched serial number GX1847X at 11:34 this morning? Respond now. A cold feeling spread through Hollis. He picked up his phone, read the text one more time, and then looked at Ennis. She was watching him, her expression calm and not at all surprised. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. She read it, but her face did not change. "You should probably close your shop early," she said softly, "and maybe you should not reply to that." Webb looked from Hollis to Ennis. "What is going on?" Hollis did not know what to say. His eyes went from the text message to the rifle, and then to the woman named Ennis. His hands started to shake. He pressed them flat against the counter to make them stop. The phone buzzed again. It was the same unknown number. "This is a national security matter. Provide contact information for the person with firearms serial GX1847X. Hollis slammed the phone down as if it had burned him. Ennis was a statue. She had not shifted a single muscle or altered her gaze from the moment she entered. A small bell chimed above the door. Hollis's head jerked up. The shop's only other patrons were walking out. Their faces were a mixture of bewilderment and alarm. They hurried away without a word. Webb was frozen, looking at Ennis as if she were an apparition. The room suddenly felt suffocating, with the walls closing in. Hollis lifted the rifle once more, his eyes finding the serial number etched in the steel. GX1847X, a code that meant something serious to people in high places. He carefully placed it back down. "You never planned to sell this, did you?" The question was just a confirmation. "No. So, what is this all about?" Ennis offered a slight, chilling smile. "I required someone to confirm its authenticity, someone who would enter it into a database. I required a person to run the number and set off an alarm. Someone to validate that this weapon is genuine and that I still exist. You wanted to be found." "I wanted an audience," Ennis clarified. "Because they are on their way, and when they arrive, I need people to tell the story of what occurred here, to verify what you witnessed and what you learned." The phone buzzed again on the counter. Hollis ignored it. He could read the message preview on the illuminated screen. "Federal agents en route to your position. Remain stationary. Do not handle any items. Wait for them." He glanced at Ennis. "They are coming. I am aware. How long?" "Not long." Webb cautiously backed away from the counter. "I really think I ought to leave." "No," Ennis stated. Her tone was quiet but absolute. "You will remain here. You are a part of this now." Webb stopped moving. Hollis could feel his heart pounding in his chest. "This is crazy. I am just a gunsmith. I evaluate firearms. This has nothing to do with me." "You became a part of this when you cleaned the dirt from that serial number," Ennis said. "There is no walking away from this anymore." Outside, the sound of tires on gravel announced an arrival. A vehicle was stopping. Hollis peered through the front window. A black sport utility vehicle with tinted glass and government plates had parked. He breathed. "They have arrived." Ennis did not flinch or look away from him. Her gaze was steady. "When they start asking, you will tell them what is true. Explain what you witnessed, what you confirmed. That is all. What will happen to you, that will be determined by their intelligence." The sport utility vehicle doors opened, and two men stepped out. They looked to be in their mid-40s, athletic, and wearing plain clothes that still screamed federal law enforcement. It was in their posture, their expensive watches, and their scanning eyes. They moved straight for the door. Hollis felt the air leave his lungs, his thoughts a jumbled mess. His only thought was, "How did I get dragged into this?" The door's bell rang gently. The two men entered. They moved with the trained economy of soldiers. Their gazes swept the shop with cold precision. The first one gave a practiced, disarming smile. "Good afternoon. We are searching for a person who may have made an inquiry about a particular serial number today." Hollis tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The second agent noticed the rifle on the countertop. A hint of recognition flashed in his eyes before his expression became blank again. "That is an exceptionally rare piece," the second agent observed. "Can you explain how it came into your possession?" Ennis straightened up from the wall she had been resting against. Her movements were deliberate and graceful. Each motion was controlled. The two men glanced at her, saw an old woman in simple clothing, and immediately discounted her. They turned their attention back to Hollis. "Sir, we require all documentation for that firearm and the identity of the individual who brought it in." "You will not be taking a single thing," Ennis stated. Her voice was low, yet it held a new kind of power. It was the voice of command, an authority that was simply assumed. The first agent hardly looked at her. "Ma'am, this is not your business. We need you to wait outside." "GX-1847X," Ennis recited. "Commissioned in October 1973. Taken out of service in February 1977. I have owned that rifle for 49 years. If you need documentation, I can provide 49 years' worth." The second agent became stiff as a board. He turned his head slowly, his gaze now fixed on her. It was as if he was noticing her for the first time. He studied the wrinkles on her face, her unwavering posture, the sheer confidence she radiated. His entire demeanor shifted. "What was your unit's designation?" he asked with great caution. "Crosswind 7. A sudden chill seemed to drain all the heat from the shop. The second agent's hand moved, an involuntary motion that looked like the start of a salute. He stopped it before it was complete and let his arm drop. "Good Lord," he whispered. "What do you believe will happen after this? Share your thoughts with us below. And if you enjoy tales of heroes the world has forgotten, make sure to subscribe. More stories are on their way." The second man was stock still. His gaze remained on Ennis. A long 30 seconds of absolute silence passed. It was Webb who finally spoke. "Can someone please tell me what is happening?" The first agent's face was white as a sheet. He took out his mobile phone. "Sir, we have to place a call immediately." The second agent remained motionless, his stare locked on Ennis. "The official story was that you died. An accident during training in 76. That is what the record states. I have seen the file myself." Ennis's mouth formed a faint, bitter smile. The report said what they wanted it to say. It is simpler to shut down a project when its operatives are all in the ground. Hollis managed to speak again. "What project? What is this all about?" The second agent at last broke his focus on Ennis and looked at Hollis. Operation Brushfire. Secret sniper missions in Laos and Cambodia near the end of the Vietnam War. On the books, it never existed. The records were all locked away or incinerated. Not all were incinerated, Ennis amended. Some of us were simply deleted. The first agent was now talking quickly into his phone. He had moved to the rear of the store for some quiet, but his words were audible. "Yes, sir, it is Crosswind 7. She is not dead. I am confirming it now. She has the rifle. The number checks out. Yes, sir. She is standing right in front of me." Webb gaped, his eyes darting between Ennis and the two men. He tried to speak twice before words finally formed. "Are you saying she was a government sniper?" The second agent completely ignored Webb. His focus stayed on Ennis, as if afraid she would disappear. "How can this be? We saw the documentation about your death. There were signed statements. There is a certificate of burial." Ennis deliberately and slowly rolled up her left sleeve. A jagged, lengthy scar came into view. It ran from her wrist nearly to her elbow. It was an old injury from surgery, the kind that follows a shrapnel wound. The skin was ridged and faded. Years of healing had smoothed it, but the evidence was clear. "Shrapnel," Ennis said plainly. "On the Cambodian border. February 12th, 1977. We were being pulled out by chopper while taking fire. We lost 2 team members that afternoon. I took down 11 hostiles from 900 meters with just iron sights after my scope was destroyed." She gestured to the rifle. "With this barrel, with this very firearm, during that specific operation." The second agent's hands were shaking slightly. "Your name is etched on the memorial wall, in Building C, at Langley." I have walked by your name 100 times. I imagine they still spell it wrong, Ennis replied without emotion. The first agent came back from his call. He had a look on his face that was a mix of bewilderment and something resembling dread. We have been instructed to take her into custody, to a protected facility. She needs to be debriefed right away. Ennis let her sleeve drop, covering the scar once more. No, the first agent seemed taken aback. Excuse me? I did not endure 50 years of living off the grid just to be made to vanish all over again, Ennis declared. Her tone was still low, but it was now filled with an absolute power. This rifle is genuine. Its serial is in the system, and there are several witnesses present here. If I go missing, someone is going to start digging. So this is what is going to happen. You are both going to walk out of here. My rifle stays with me. And after your bosses realize they cannot make me disappear twice, they can choose to let this story come out with a whisper or with a bang. The second agent looked at his partner. A quiet acknowledgement flowed between them, the kind that comes from long partnership. He turned back to Ennis. Model. The agent's arm snapped up into a full, crisp military salute. Ennis met it not with a salute of her own, but with a firm, decisive nod. The men started for the door, but one turned back. Ma'am, I just want to say thank you for your service, even if it was meant to be forgotten. The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The very air seemed frozen. Webb finally let out a shaky breath. That just happened. That really, truly just happened. Hollis was completely still, his brain refusing to accept what he had just witnessed. A woman, officially dead for almost 50 years, was standing in his store, and 2 government agents had just paid her their respects. Ennis moved to the workbench and began to put the rifle back together. She wrapped the parts in the wool blanket with skilled, efficient hands. I was not entirely honest before, she said, without looking up. I am not here to sell this. I just needed an expert to confirm its identity. You have done that. Why? Hollis's voice trembled. After all these years, why now? Ennis paused her work, her posture perfectly rigid. When she spoke, her voice had a newfound gravity. Because they are all dying, she stated. The men behind Operation Brushfire, from the generals giving orders to the officers drawing plans. They are old now. They are taking our history to the grave with them. Before the last one dies, I needed someone to know that one of us is left who remembers. Webb took a hesitant step forward. Did you really do everything you said? Ennis clutched the wrapped rifle to her chest as if it were a sacred object. 9 confirmed, 11 probable. Every one of them was an enemy combatant. Every one of them was to protect my teammates who never came back. She stroked the rifle through the blanket. This was my service. My team never doubted me, and our enemies certainly knew I was a soldier. She walked to the exit, the bell on the door chiming as she opened it. Hollis acted on impulse. Wait. Ennis halted in the doorway without turning back. What do we do now? Ennis replied. That depends on how many people believe you and how loud you are willing to speak. And with that, she vanished. The door closed, and the bell gave a final, soft ring. Hollis and Webb stared at the empty space where she had been. A flash of light from the workbench drew Hollis's eye. He went over and found a single brass casing sitting where the rifle parts had laid. She must have dropped it while packing. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. The stamp on the bottom read, 7.6 2x50, 1mm NATO, 1974. This was real proof. It was physical evidence from a conflict that was never supposed to have happened. Webb came over and glanced at the casing. So you believe her? Hollis carefully placed the casing on the counter. Yes, I do. What is your next move? I truly have no idea. Just then his phone vibrated with a text from a blocked number. Do not discuss these events with anyone. This is a matter of national security. Any breach is subject to federal prosecution. Hollis showed the phone to Webb, who read it and let out a short, tense laugh. So now they were making threats. That much was clear. Hollis's gaze shifted from the brass casing to an old photo by the register, then to the locked filing cabinet in the corner. The cabinet suddenly felt like it was full of secrets. "I just do not know," he repeated quietly. Webb had left 20 minutes earlier, saying he needed a strong drink, possibly the entire bottle. Hollis had locked up right behind him, flipping the sign to closed at 1 in the afternoon. Now he stood alone in the silence. The fluorescent lights above hummed steadily. The familiar scent of gun oil and wood cleaner filled the air, just as it always did. The shop looked identical, but everything felt different. He walked to the filing cabinet and just looked at it. The lock was simple. He had the tools and skill from his gunsmithing work to open it easily, but he did not try. Instead, he went to the drawer under the cash register. He retrieved the spare key ring that his grandfather had always kept in the drawer. It held 7 keys. He knew most of them by sight: keys for the front door, the safe, the display cabinets. But one was different. It was a small brass key, the kind used for a filing cabinet. Hollis went back to the cabinet and tried the key. It fit perfectly, turning with a gentle click that unlocked the drawer. Inside were rows of manila folders, organized by year, with tabs written in flawless script. They contained deployment orders, supply requests, and mission summaries. He chose one folder randomly. It was a weapons requisition from April 1974 for Special 7.62 NATO ammunition. The delivery point was Firebase Hotel, but the location coordinates had been blacked out. A smeared signature was stamped with an unfamiliar official seal. He opened a second folder. This one was a report from August 1975. It described a long-range kill and a successful evacuation. The agent was referred to only as Crosswind 7. Hollis placed the folder back on the stack. He realized his hands were trembling again. His grandfather had not just run a gun shop. This place had been a logistics hub for secret missions. His grandfather was involved in brushfire. With a sudden, cold understanding, Hollis looked at the photo behind the cash register and removed it from the frame. 7 soldiers were posed in a jungle, their faces hidden by shadows. One of them was noticeably shorter than the rest. He recognized the way she stood. It was Annis, 49 years younger, with her team. He turned the photo over. A faded message on the back said, "Crosswind Unit, April 1975, after the Firebase Hotel run. Pray they all return safely." But they had not all returned. The weight of it all hit him, and he sank onto a stool, burying his face in his hands. His phone began to ring a real call, not a message from a private number. He picked it up. A man's voice said, "Mr. Hollis, this is retired Colonel Marcus Reeves. I believe you had a visitor today who probably left you with some questions." The voice was elderly yet strong, with clear military precision. "I am not sure what I should say," Hollis answered. "You need to listen," Reeves said. "The woman in your store was part of a clandestine unit that saved American lives. They worked in places we were never officially present, performing tasks we could not admit to. At the project's conclusion, they had a choice: disappear with new identities, fully supported by us, or face public hearings that would ruin them. Almost every one of them chose to disappear." Reeves continued, "She is back because we are all getting old. The handful of us who know what they did, who appreciate their sacrifice, are almost gone. Time is short. If somebody does not tell their story, it will die with us." "Why my shop? Why did she come here?" "Your grandfather was the man who supplied Project Brushfire. Evidence of the operation is right there in your files. You are young enough to carry this story forward after we are gone." Hollis shut his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to tell the truth," Reeves told him. "When the time is right, you will tell the world what you confirmed. That the rifle is real, the serial number is valid, and the soldier who used it was a patriot." "What if they call me a liar?" Hollis asked. "They will believe you. We are working to unseal the records. Even a partial release will be sufficient. Soon, parts of Operation Brushfire will be revealed. Your story will be vital. You will be giving a voice to history. And if I say no, then true heroes will remain ghosts, Reeves replied. A terrible injustice. The call disconnected. Hollis sat completely still. The shop he loved suddenly felt small and suffocating. He looked at the brass casing, the old photo, and the locked cabinet his dad never touched. His entire life was built on secrets. The shop was not just a shop. His grandfather was more than a businessman. The old rotary phone was not just for show. It was all a carefully constructed lie, or maybe just secrets kept to protect the illusion of a normal life. Hollis stood and walked over to the rotary phone, staring at it. For 643 days, that phone had been dead silent. Now, he felt it could scream to life at any moment. But it did not ring. He returned to his bench and picked up the spent brass casing. It shined under the work lamp. The numbers stamped on it were still sharp after 50 years. It was military grade. A real person had fired this round. Someone loaded the cartridge, calculated the distance, held their breath, and squeezed. They watched through a scope as it traveled 900 meters and ended a life. And that person was the quiet old woman who was meant to have died 49 years ago. Hollis put the casing down, took out his phone, and began typing a new note. He wrote, November 14th. A woman named Ennis brought in a rifle, serial GX1847X. It was a military prototype sniper rifle. My system alerted the authorities. 2 agents arrived. They confirmed she was Crosswind 7, an operative from a secret mission called Brushfire. Her talent and shrapnel scar were undeniable. The agents even saluted her. This was living proof of a hero the world forgot, a secret he now shared. He gathered all the evidence. Suddenly, the shop's door chimed. Hollis's heart pounded, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol under the counter. An elderly man entered, using a cane, wearing a vintage army jacket with strange patches. His eyes scanned the room, stopping on a picture and then on Hollis. "You have to be the grandson," the man said with certainty. "I am. Your grandpa helped us when no one else would." "And who are you, sir?" The man stepped closer. "You had a visitor recently, a woman with a rifle." "How could you know that?" "A message came through an hour ago that Crosswind 7 was back. I had to see it myself." "You know her?" The old man gave a slow nod. "We served together, February 1977. I flew the helicopter that pulled her team out. We were drawing intense fire coming in. She covered us from a nearby ridge. I have never seen anyone shoot like that. 11 enemies eliminated in about 90 seconds. Every shot was perfect." He glanced at the photo on the wall. "I am in that picture, 3rd from the left." Hollis looked closely at the photograph and found him. The man in the picture stood taller, his military posture clear despite the blur. "You were really there." 4 tours, the man confirmed, "in places I cannot mention, with people I was told to forget. But I never forgot her. Crosswind 7 was the finest soldier I ever met." "Then why come here today?" "Her reappearance means something big is happening. Perhaps those files are being opened. If their stories are coming out, you need to know some things. It concerns your grandfather and the true purpose of this place." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed, sealed envelope. "Your grandfather gave this to me back in 1978. He told me to deliver it to the next owner if he was gone, or if Brushfire came up. He trusted the right person would know what to do." The man gave the envelope to Hollis. The wax seal had never been broken. In his grandfather's script it said, "For the one who continues the work." "What's inside?" Hollis asked. "The truth," the old soldier said, "as much of it as he could write down. You will find names, dates, and missions, the proof that they were real." "So why has it stayed sealed?" "It was never my story to read. And some truths carry a heavy price. Your grandfather understood that. He preserved their history, but buried it to keep them safe. As he turned to go, the man paused at the door. "Please tell her that I remember," he said. "Tell Crosswind 7 that Pelican 3 has not forgotten, and I am happy she survived." With that, he left, the door's bell announcing his departure. Hollis was alone, holding the envelope. The old paper felt so brittle, as if it could turn to dust in his hands. He placed it on the counter and just looked at it. The quiet hum of the lights, the scent of cleaning solvent, the angle of the sun through the window were unchanged. The shop was the same, but his whole reality was different now. At last, Hollis took the envelope and carefully broke the wax seal. Inside, he found aged photographs, formal documents, and scribbled notes. There was a ledger of weapons with delivery dates and locations, maps marked with coordinates, and mission plans from an old typewriter. A letter from his grandfather was also there, addressed to no one. It began, "If you are reading this, then the right person is piecing together the hidden story. This is for the best. What we did had to be done." The people of Operation Brushfire protected this country. They worked in environments that would break ordinary men. They accepted missions where rescue was not an option. And when it was over, they were cast aside. The government issued them new identities and ordered them to bury the past. But some things demand to be remembered. Certain kinds of bravery should be recognized, even after 50 years. This shop was how they survived. I provided their weapons, their ammunition, and their special gear. I knew a few of them and their missions, but I was sworn to silence. Each one of them was a hero. If their history is finally being revealed, ensure the full story is told. Do not allow anyone in power to rewrite what they accomplished. The envelope held a small brass key, not for the shop's cabinet. Its tag said, "First National Bank in Knoxville. Safe Deposit Box 347. You will find more proof inside. Use it when the moment comes." Hollis laid everything out, staring at the history spread across his counter. He saw photos of young soldiers in jungle uniforms and documents marked "Classified" and "For your eyes only." He did not know the names, but he understood their importance. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Ennis. "I hear the pilot stopped by." "Excellent. Now you are beginning to understand. You will be prepared when the files are released." "I appreciate your trust," Hollis replied. "Why am I part of this?" Her answer was immediate. "Because your grandfather gave you this duty, without you even knowing. Because you chased the truth instead of looking away. Because this story requires someone to tell it. And I am done being invisible." Hollis sank into a chair, the sheer heaviness of it all landing on him. His day began normally. Coffee at 6 o'clock, running diagnostics, cleaning the display cases. Now he was holding evidence of a hidden war and communicating with a ghost. And in that moment, the ancient rotary phone began to ring. Hollis shot up, his eyes fixed on the phone. The sound was a loud, jarring noise from a different era. It rang a second time. He got to his feet, crossed the room, and lifted the heavy black receiver. "Hello!" The static cleared, and a serious, older man's voice came on. "This line has been dormant for 38 years. If it rings, the emergency plan is engaged. Are you his grandson?" "Yes, I am." "Then pay close attention. A portion of the Brushfire files is going to be unsealed. The public will see it in 6 weeks, and Congress will hold a hearing in 8 weeks. We require witnesses to confirm the operation was real, people with proof and standing. Your grandfather created this as a final safeguard. This phone was set to ring if his people ever needed a voice. The person who answers is their defender. Who is speaking? A man who is deeply in their debt," the voice replied. "Prepare yourself. You are going to be asked to testify. Bring the papers. Bring the rifle's information. Bring what you know." The connection ended. Hollis slowly placed the receiver back down. He saw that his hand was shaking. A profound quiet filled the shop once more. a stillness so complete it felt as if the walls were listening. He glanced at the counter. The evidence, the history, the truth. He had 6 weeks before the announcement, and 8 weeks before the hearing. 8 weeks to get ready to share the tale of soldiers who had been ghosts for 50 years. Hollis looked at the photo one more time, trying to make out the faces. The team was posed by some crates in a jungle. They were so young, performing a dangerous job where they officially did not exist. Only one made it back to continue the fight for their honor, and now he was enlisted in that fight too. The brass casing shone under the light. It was a tiny object with an enormous weight, a single round from a battle 50 years ago whose impact was only now being felt. Hollis locked the cabinet, collected the files, and secured them in his safe. He knew his first trip tomorrow morning would be to the bank. He needed to collect the items from box 347, arrange the proof, and figure out his words. But for now, he simply sat in the quiet shop, letting the gravity of the last 6 hours sink in. He placed the old photo on the wall again, now inside a beautiful frame with a formal nameplate. He positioned the shell casing in a display case lined with velvet, beside a small card. The card said, 7.62 NATO, 1974. Operation Brushfire, a bullet used to protect American soldiers, discovered by Crosswind 7. This was tangible proof, the truth finally given form. If this story resonates with you, I encourage you to pass it along. And if you feel that forgotten heroes should be heard, please subscribe for more tales about those who must be remembered. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind. Hollis devoted himself to the back room, sorting through the hidden files. Inside the safe deposit box was everything his grandfather's letter had mentioned. The box held mission summaries, deployment papers, and sharp photographs of the agents, whose faces were now visible. He discovered the true identities behind the code names. Crosswind 7 was a lieutenant named Sarah Ennis Carthage. She had been only 23 when she joined the fight, and 27 when she disappeared from every official document. The official announcement came on a Tuesday in January. The Department of Defense issued a short clinical statement. It confirmed Operation Brushfire was a special program that ran from 1973 to 1977. They unsealed a handful of documents. A hearing was scheduled for February 15th to go over the operation. Not even an hour passed before Hollis's phone began to ring. It was Colonel Reeves on the line. The colonel explained the committee required a witness to verify the program's existence. He told Hollis to get his testimony ready and to bring all the evidence. He made it clear how crucial this was. Hollis promised he would not miss it. A few days later, a parcel showed up at his shop without a return address. Hollis opened it to find a letter from Ennis, written in a steady, clear script. "I appreciate you trusting us," it said. "Just as I said, the rifle is at the Smithsonian now. They are creating an exhibit for it. Operation Brushfire. Shadows in Service is set to open in March. You ought to be there when they dedicate it. You have earned that honor." The letter came with a new photograph. It pictured the rifle inside a museum display, polished and expertly presented. The sign said, GX1847X. A sniper rifle from Covert Missions, 1973 to 1977, used by Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage, Crosswind 7. Her identity was at last public knowledge. Hollis placed the new picture on the wall, right next to the old image of her team. 2 photos, separated by a lifetime. A woman who had operated in secrecy was finally emerging from the darkness. The shop had a different feeling now. People still came in for their usual gear, but Hollis now knew that some items carry stories far beyond their appearance. Hollis learned to ask insightful questions and listen carefully to the replies. He considered all the facts before making a judgment. Webb visited twice a week but never brought up what happened that day in November. He would, however, look at the wall photos, the displayed brass casing, and then to Hollis with an approving gaze. The morning of February 15th was sharp and bright. Hollis had gone to Washington the day before and booked a hotel near Capitol Hill, but he could not sleep. He went over his testimony again and again. He thought about the burden of exposing a truth hidden for 50 years. The hearing room was not as large as he had imagined. It had wooden walls, seats for visitors, and a long table up front for 5 Congress members. Camera crews were positioned on each side. The room had space for around 40 people. Hollis got there early, picked a chair in the back, and watched as people came in. He recognized a few of them from the pictures. They were old now, in their 80s. Some used wheelchairs, while others leaned on canes. Every one of them wore a piece of their past service, like a jacket with old patches or a hat with a faded emblem. You could see their pride mixed with the heaviness of the long years of silence. At 9:15, Ennis walked in. She had on a simple dark suit with her hair pulled back, moving with that same deliberate grace Hollis remembered. But there was a difference in her now. She stood taller, carrying herself with a newfound confidence, like a great weight had been taken from her shoulders. She sat in the front row without looking at anyone or making any sign of recognition. She simply waited with her hands folded. The hearing started at 9:30. The committee head, a woman in her 60s, was the first to speak. She noted the sensitivity of the topic, the extended secrecy, and the huge sacrifices of operatives who got no recognition. She then called the first witness, a retired general who was 82 years old. An aide escorted him to the stand. He confirmed that Operation Brushfire was a critical strategic program. He described the lives it saved, the intelligence it produced, and the missions it accomplished. He spoke for 20 minutes, his voice remarkably steady. When he was done, he looked straight at Ennis and gave her one firm, meaningful nod. The second person to testify was the pilot called Pelican 3, the very same man from Hollis's shop. He spoke of rescue missions and the operatives who worked in conditions that broke every rule in the book. He remembered their calm while under fire, and a certain mission in February of 1977. A single agent's covering fire was the only thing that saved his team. He did not say Ennis's name, but he did not have to. Everyone in the room knew exactly who he meant. Hollis was the third person called to testify. He walked to the table, set down his folder of documents, took the oath, and sat down. The chairperson asked him to give his name and describe his connection to Operation Brushfire. "I am Hollis Mercer. I run a gun shop in Tennessee that my grandfather operated during the Brushfire years. Last November, a woman brought a rifle into my shop to be valued. Its serial number was GX1847X. I checked a database and found out the rifle was classified government equipment. The woman then told me she was the operative that the rifle had been issued to. Within a few hours, federal agents showed up to confirm her identity. Later on, I discovered documents in my grandfather's records that showed his shop acted as a supply station for Brushfire." The chairperson asked if Hollis had any physical proof with him. Hollis opened his folder and took out a brass casing from its plastic box. "This was left in my shop by the operative. It is a 1974 7.62 NATO shell fired on a mission that my grandfather wrote about in his logs." He placed it on the table and then presented the pictures. "The Crosswind team from 1975, forms for weapon requests, and reports written after missions." He put everything on display. "This proves Operation Brushfire was real. It shows that these individuals served, they were successful, and they deserve to be recognized." The committee examined the evidence, handing the items to one another. They asked questions about its verification, who had kept it for all this time, and how Hollis was sure it was real. "My grandfather was very careful about details," Hollis told them. "He understood that one day the truth would require someone to stand up for it. He felt that these people were important." The chairperson nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. These items are now entered into the official record." Hollis went back to his chair, his hands trembling with a mix of adrenaline and relief. The chairperson then called the final witness, Lieutenant Sarah Ennis Carthage, who is also known as Crosswind 7. The entire room fell silent. Ennis stood up, walked to the witness table with her familiar, steady pace, sat, and took the oath. Her voice was perfectly steady. The chairperson spoke with a kind tone. "Lieutenant Carthage, thank you for being willing to be here today. We know this must be difficult, considering your service and how you were removed from official history. For the record, please state your name and your service title." "My name is Sarah Ennis Carthage. I served as Crosswind 7 in Operation Brushfire from October 1973 to February 1977. My role was a sniper, and I finished 42 missions. I had 9 confirmed kills and 11 probable kills. All of them were enemy fighters. Every single time, it was to protect American troops." The chairperson continued. "This committee has looked at classified mission reports that mention your code name. Yet, according to official military files, you died in a training incident in 1976. Could you clarify that discrepancy?" Ennis's face stayed like a stone mask. When Brushfire was shut down, its agents were given 2 choices. We could go through a congressional hearing which would reveal secret methods still in use, or we could accept a new life and disappear. I chose to disappear. My faked death was the way to make that happen. And why have you decided to come forward now? Because the officials who gave us that choice are now old and weak, because their families have a right to know their true history, and because I am finished being a ghost." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, the first hint of emotion Hollis had ever seen from her. The panel members talked quietly. The chairman then spoke to her again. "Lieutenant Carthage, this committee recognizes your service and what it cost you. We understand the difficult situation you are in and the injustice of having your record erased. It is our formal recommendation that you and all Brushfire operatives be given the Intelligence Star for courage in secret operations." A powerful silence instantly filled the chamber. From the front row, an older gentleman got to his feet and raised his hand in a perfect, crisp salute. Another man followed his lead. In less than 30 seconds, every veteran in the room was standing, saluting the woman whose history had been silenced for 50 years. Ennis remained seated, offering no salute in return. Her gaze, however, traveled across the faces of old comrades, acknowledging the history they all shared. The chairman and the committee then rose. They did not salute, but their posture conveyed profound respect. The quiet held for a full half-minute. At last, Enos stood. She gave the room a single intentional nod before turning to exit, concluding the proceedings. Hollis sat motionless, completely stunned. He saw the veterans lower their hands, take their seats, and brush tears from their eyes. Webb, sitting just ahead, glanced back and met his eyes with a knowing nod. An entire story was exchanged in that one silent look. In the corridor, Hollis found Enos standing alone, looking out over the city from a large window. She held her hands clasped behind her in a formal military stance. "What you did in there was brave," Hollis told her. She answered without turning from the view. "It was long overdue." "What happens next?" he asked. "A service at Arlington," she said. "It is scheduled for next month. Our names are being added to the Brushfire Memorial. 17 of us are left, and we will all be there." And after that, she finally turned to him with a small, genuine smile. "Then, my hiding is over. I might write a book, or just live peacefully, knowing the story is finally out. But I will never be erased again." Hollis offered his hand. "Thank you for placing your trust in me." Enos shook it firmly. "And thank you for believing me when it was easier not to." She then walked toward the elevators where the veterans waited. The pilot gave her a warm embrace, and soon she was surrounded by her comrades, all sharing memories and gratitude. Hollis was back in Tennessee the following day. From the street, his shop appeared unchanged, but the feeling inside was complete. He spent the next week rearranging everything. The filing cabinet was positioned behind the counter, and he decided to leave it permanently unlocked. He created a new label for it that said, "Historical Archive, Operation Brushfire, Now customers could see it, ask about it, and learn the story. The old rotary phone on the wall was silent once more. Yet for Hollis, it was much more than an ornament. It stood as a symbol that some bonds never break and that some truths take decades to surface. He added to his wall of photographs. Next to the initial Crosswind team picture, he placed new images. Enos at the hearing, the rifle in its museum display, and a shot from Arlington of 17 veterans standing together one last time. He added one last photo, taken at the museum event in March. The photograph showed Enos beside the glass case holding the rifle. Her hand rested on the glass, her gaze fixed on the weapon that shaped 4 years of her service and the 49 years of quiet that came after. In the photo, she was smiling. About 3 months later, a woman in her early 20s entered his shop. She looked anxious and held a worn-out duffel bag. "My grandmother died last month," she began. "She told me if I was ever in financial trouble, I should bring this to someone who knew its true worth. She left me this address." From her bag, she produced an old M1911 pistol. Its finish was faded, the handle worn smooth, and the serial number was barely visible. Hollis saw the worry on her face, the fear he might reject her. He reached for a brass brush. "Let me see what you have here." She watched as he gently cleaned the markings. "Was your grandfather in this line of work too?" she asked. "He was," Hollis replied. "And he taught me that real value is seldom obvious. It is usually concealed by time, rust, and being forgotten. You have to search beneath the surface to discover what really matters." Slowly, the serial number started to appear, one numeral at a time. It was a standard issue firearm from 1943. Its condition suggested it had been used during the Second World War, likely in Europe or the Pacific. The model was not rare, but it was significant. A soldier carried this, Hollis explained. Someone relied on this when everything was on the line. That history gives it a value that cannot be measured in dollars. The young woman visibly relaxed, her tension easing. "What do you think it is worth?" Hollis put the brush down. "To a collector, maybe $800. But to your family, it is priceless. This is part of your family's story. Your grandmother wanted you to own it. You should hold on to it to honor your past." Tears welled in her eyes, but a smile appeared on her face. "Thank you." After she left, Hollis surveyed his shop. The photos, the archive of secrets, the cased brass shell, and the silent rotary phone. The shop had finally become the sanctuary his grandfather envisioned. It was now a haven where lost stories were rediscovered, where overlooked items were cherished, and where integrity mattered more than convenience. At 5:47, Hollis started closing up. The actions were the same, but his purpose felt entirely new. He cleaned the display glass with deep respect, reviewed the security cameras, and logged the day's business. Before leaving, he paused before the wall of photos. He looked at Enos at the museum, the Crosswind unit, and the Arlington ceremony. 17 heroes, whose stories had been erased, were at long last brought into the light. These secret soldiers were finally receiving their overdue honor. Hollis lifted the brass casing, rolling it in his hand. A 7.62 NATO round from 1974, fired 5 decades earlier. This small piece of history, carried home and preserved, was the undeniable proof that some truths refused to be buried. He set it back on its stand, switched off the lights, and locked the door. A deep Tennessee night began to fall, with stars appearing one by one. The highway noise softened to a whisper, and life went on, oblivious to the little store protecting secrets that were now public history. Inside his truck, Hollis hesitated before turning the key. He looked at the unlit shop, the Mercer and Sons firearms sign standing watch. It stood for 3 generations, each with a different mission, a depot, a business, and finally, a memorial. His phone vibrated. A text from Enos appeared. It said, "I saw your name as a consultant at the museum. We are getting 20,000 visitors a month. People are desperate for these histories. None of this would have happened without you. Hollis typed back, "The privilege was entirely mine. Thanks for entrusting me with their story." He shifted into drive, his thoughts filled with antique weapons, classified papers, and the burden of a 50-year secret. He thought about the bravery it took to step out of the shadows, and about his grandfather's firm belief that the truth would always find its worth. The following morning, Hollis opened the shop at 5:47. His routine had not changed, but his perspective was completely different. His job was no longer just a business. It was a vocation, a link to something much bigger than himself. At 9 o'clock, a customer came in with a rifle for appraisal. The weapon was battered and seemed useless, but Hollis welcomed the man warmly. He accepted the firearm carefully, inspected it with focused detail, and listened intently to the man's account. He now understood that worth is often hidden, that forgotten objects hold powerful histories, and that every story matters. The sun caught the brass casing on the desk, its gleam a constant lesson. A bullet can take 50 years to find its mark, and a secret can remain silent for just as long. Someone can step out from a life in the dark, and a small Tennessee shop can show that truths cannot be kept forever. Those photos on the wall connected the past to the present. A secret was now a fact. A ghost had been given a name. Everyone finally learned that Crosswind 7 was Sarah Enos Carthage, and her story would never be lost again. Standing at his counter, Hollis looked at the worn rifle, the hopeful customer, and the space that had shown him how to see what lies beneath. He handled the appraisal just as he now handled everything, with calm respect, understanding that the broken can be mended, the worthless can be invaluable, and that every finish line is also a starting point. Sunlight streamed in, carrying the scent of gun oil and old wood. The photos looked on, the files were public, and the history was safe. In that sunlight, he saw the image of an old woman setting a rusted gun on his counter, an ordinary act that changed the world. Have you ever seen someone who was overlooked finally get the credit they deserved? Tell us about that moment of justice in the comments. If you agree that truth is always worth the fight, no matter how long it takes, hit that subscribe button. Their histories deserve to be told. Their sacrifices deserve to be honored. And the truth must never, ever be silenced. Model.